David, you are live on the air. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you? I just wanted to first of all say thank you for everything that you've like. You're a big inspiration to me, and I grew up as a Pentecostal Christian, 24 years. My great grandparents were Jewish. My grandmother was adopted and not raised religious, but I chose to follow um, the ways of the Torah, and I became a Noahide after 24 years of being a
Mm.
Pentecostal. And I just want to thank you for like all your knowledge and everything you do. And so basically my question is because it's been hard, making that transition, and I try to talk to my Christian family and friends a lot about, the Old Testament, and I'm trying to understand at what point if Jude Christianity was originally a Jewish sect, basically, the disciples. So at what point, what gave Paul the authority, or when did they accept Paul's authority today to decide it's okay, you don't have to be circumcised, or it's okay, you don't have to go to church on Saturday, go on Sunday. Who made the final decisions for the modern day church? I'm just
Mm.
trying to understand because I know there's a lot of different sects.
Right. Really, really, really great question. So, first, to get a sense of what Christianity is to Judaism, it's very much like you've been a Christian, were a Christian for many years. It's very much like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, meaning the Mormons. How is the Mormon Church related to Assemblies of God or the Roman Catholic Church? That's kind of the distance. So if you want to know, Mormonism is to Orthodox Christianity what Christianity was to Judaism. It wasn't like it was a little different, It was a massive, massive change. But Christianity is a heresy of Judaism. Now, just like there are many different heretical groups of Christianity, some closer, not so close, it varied. The Pentecostal movement, as an example, which you were a part of, like the Assemblies of God, which is the most well-known Pentecostal denomination, was certainly deemed, and continues to be deemed as heretical by many Southern Baptists, as an example. The notion of speaking in tongues today, most Christians believe that those things have ceased. Now, the question is, at what point, who appointed Paul? Well, the answer is Paul was a very big fan of Paul. He liked Paul a lot. And Paul was making claims. He was making claims that it is his authority that he has directly from Jesus Christ that overrides anything else. And in fact, if you look at his epistles, you'll notice that he is arguing against his chief interlocutors are fellow Christians who had a different Christology, who held to a different view. So Paul was very much fighting his entire career with not religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, right? But rather fellow Christians. So there was a war going on. And we see this battle unfolding in the book of Acts. The book of Acts, the last 2/3 of the book of Acts is really devoted to Paul. The book of Acts should be called the book of the Acts. It should be called the book of Paul. It's really devoted to showing how Paul wins the day. But we see clearly in the book of Acts that there are other Christians who had a very different view than Paul, who held that if you're going to become I'm just going to use the word Christian. Christians didn't use the term Christian at the time, or it appears they didn't, because although the word Christian appears in the Christian Bible 3 times, on none of those occasions is that word used by Christians. Could be there were some Christians who used it, but it seems that's not the case. But we'll just use it because it's conventional. There were Christians who thought that if you're going to become a Christian, You still have to keep the Torah. You still have to keep the commandments. And we see that this was a very, very persuasive group and gave Paul a lot of trouble and made Paul very, very angry. So we see that everywhere. Galatians 3, it begins earlier, but in Galatians 3, he excoriates churches in Asia Minor, churches that he had already set up years earlier, and he calls them, you idiots, you foolish Galatians, who bewitched you with this idea that salvation comes through the law. It really comes through grace alone. So Paul is appointing himself. He's claiming, this is very important, he's not claiming that he understands Isaiah 53 and Daniel 9. He never mentions the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 that missionaries routinely use. Paul claims that he has special revelation directly from Jesus, not like the supposed pillars of the church, and he did not get his authority from them. So you see what he's battling. You see what he's up against. And when he keeps repeating, I'm no liar, the reason he's repeating he's not a liar is because that's exactly what people are accusing him of. So it really was an open court of Paul against his enemies, because the religion is just building. It's like the Church of the Latter-day Saints. In its early years, it's building, and there's an enormous amount of infighting in the Church of the Latter-day Saints, including to this day. In all sorts of issues and polygamy, they're fighting with outside, inside, fighting away. The question is, how did Paul win and others lose? So the answer is that Paul offered something that was really quite, it was a marketing tool that was very, very effective. And he solved a number of issues. Judaism during the first century was a fairly popular religion. It was the only Abrahamic monotheism at the time. There was no competition. There was no other Abrahamic monotheism. That was it. That was, if you wanted an Abrahamic monotheism, Judaism was the only opportunity. So if Jews and Judaism were fairly admired in the empire, now the Romans and the Jews battled it out a bit, but it was usually over paying taxes. It wasn't over the religion itself. People admired the Jews for their beliefs, except for the resurrection. They couldn't wrap their head around that, why we'd want to resurrect. But they certainly, the idea of one God was very attractive. In the Greco-Roman world, they were very well aware that the Jews had a good relationship with the most important person of the Western civilization. That's Alexander the Great, who was considered divine, a god born of a virgin, and that Alexander the Great had any relationship with the Jews that was positive. For many, many reasons, Jews and Judaism were held, but there were some issues that they had with us, and those issues entailed that to be a Jew, to convert to Judaism, is a lot of mitzvahs, a lot of commandments to keep. And people didn't want to keep all those mitzvot. It's not like today. Today it's very easy to be a religious Jew. Today, if you want kosher food, you can get anywhere, really. If I travel in Indonesia, you can go into a big supermarket and they have all the foods you can imagine with kosher from all over the world, except meat had to be brought in from Singapore or Malay or Manila, but basically you can get anything you want to. But then it wasn't so simple, right? It wasn't, and circumcision, of course. So Paul essentially does two massive things. Number one, he says you don't have to keep the commandments anymore, and the commandments that existed were only a foreshadowing of Jesus, right? So Colossians 2, verse 16 to 17, so you don't have to keep the mitzvot. Talking about ritual commandments now. And circumcision, he would scream about this. So he eliminated the problem of becoming Jewish is in that, number one. When I say becoming Jewish, that means his iteration of Christianity, he insisted was a fulfillment of Judaism. So he said, you don't have to keep ritual commandments anymore, and it won't save you. And if you put your faith in circumcision, that Christ will avail you nothing. He argues that in Glee. You hear what he says? That if you circumcise, then Christ will not even help you. And the other issue he addresses is the Jewish people are an ethno-religious group, but the real thing, real ethno-religious group. There are other ethno-religious groups today, but they're not really ethno-religious groups, like the Druze, for example, or a breakaway group of the Shia Islam. So today they don't allow conversions in or out. They can't control out, but they don't want them in. So people think they're ethno-religious. Well, we can call them that, but they don't really come from the same family. The Jews are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the question, how do you join the Jews in any way? And now you could be a Noahide, but and be heir to the blessings given to the Jews. So Paul solves that issue, and he says, in the body of Christ is neither Jew nor Gentile. That's how Galatians chapter 3 ends. So Paul, essentially everybody is competing in this market of ideas, in this man-made religion that's synchronizing Judaism and the pagan ideas in the Greco-Roman world. Now, Paul didn't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity, but he certainly held that Jesus was a divine sort of being in the Roman sense. He was higher than others. He was the Son of God in some way. He was not equal with the Father. Paul didn't know about, never heard of such an idea. So you can understand why in this, as the Christian religion is developing rapidly, you can see why Paul knew exactly what the people wanted and did not want. He synchronized pagan ideas or Greek ideas, Gnostic ideas. He says openly, he says, look, I have a secret mystery that no one else has. He openly says it. If you go to the Jews for Jesus website, they won't tell you any of this. I'm telling it to you. If you look up Chosen People Ministries on their website, it'll tell you that the proof of Jesus, of Christianity, can be demonstrated through hundreds of prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. But in fact, Paul is saying, no, I have special revelation directly from Jesus Christ, a mystery known to no other person. This is a mind-blowing thing. Listen to my theology. Listen to what this mystery. And he says openly in 1 Corinthians 2, 7 and 8, that no one else knew it. And if the leaders of the generations that killed Jesus would have known this mystery, they would have never killed Jesus. See Ephesians chapter 3. All you have to do is open Ephesians 3. You could just look up the word mystery. It's always Paul. So Paul is saying that I have secret knowledge. This is in echtige, means this is real Gnosticism. The world around us is broken. The world around us is filled with sickness and disease. But if you have special knowledge, you can learn who you are and how to escape this world. That's what's critical. So therefore, Paul is able to synchronize Greco-Roman ideas with Judaism in a way that was most successful, and therefore his interlocutors, his enemies, who were groups, we might call them Ebionites, and they failed and were thrown out of court and were crushed. It worked perfectly. Now, not keeping the Shabbos is in Paul. That means Paul does say that you don't have to keep the Shabbos anymore. He says it openly in Colossians 2, 16, 17. He says, in fact, let no one urge you about the Shabbos, about high new moons, what you eat, what you drink. Let no one tell you about this. Now, you may think that the reason Paul says that you don't have to worry about Jewish holidays is because he's speaking to non-Jews, and therefore they're B'nai Noach, and they're not obligated to keep Shabbos. That would have made sense. That's not what he argues. Look at verse 17. He says, because the law is only a shadow. A shadow is nothing. You could see it, but it's nothing. It's the only thing that you can see that isn't anything. A shadow just is an absence of light. So he says the law is only a shadow, means it has no substance. and the essence is Christ. It means the whole point. This is like the Epistle of Barnabas. The Epistle of Barnabas will tweak it up, but it's the same basic idea. That book doesn't make it in the canon. So Paul wins, and Paul is already saying that Shabbos is... it says in Exodus 31 that it's Oisi L'Olam, it's an eternal covenant. It says in Ezekiel chapter 37, 24 and 25 that Jews will be keeping the Torah. Paul could care less about those things. Torah says openly that the Shabbos, the commandments will be forever and will be present in the Messianic age. But even today people don't read Tanakh. Can you imagine the ancient world? In order to read Tanakh, you needed a handwritten manuscript written on not cheap paper, but written on parchment, very expensive, papyrus, a plant, still expensive. It was very hard. So Paul could say what he wants and get away with it. Now, in Acts, we find that there's a big fight going on, and it's resolved that essentially early Christians only had to keep the 7 Noahide laws, which includes not eating the meat that was offered to idols, which is forbidden for a non-Jew. Someone offers a meat, kills an animal for avodah zarah, for idolatry, neither a Jew nor a non-Jew is allowed to eat it. But if you see in 1 Corinthians 8 and 9, this is a big issue, and Paul says you can eat it. It's unbelievable. He got it. Now, the person who openly is going to say that the Sabbath is no longer the Sabbath, but Sunday is the Sabbath of the church, is going to be a man who lived a little bit later than Paul, who was the bishop of a city that Paul had visited, and that's the bishop of Antioch, and his name was Ignatius. Ignatius is the first person that we know of that says that the Sunday Sabbath should be established for Christians. So that Paul won because he tapped in, and essentially his ideas won out, and the other ideas were thoroughly crushed. And by the time we get to the Council of Nicaea, 4th century, when Christianity is established in the 4th century, Christianity is established as the official religion of the Roman Empire, all of his enemies, Nazarenes, Ebionites, they were around. It's not like they just all died immediately. By the time we get to the 4th century, when Christianity comes of its own, all these other groups are basically thrown out of court. It doesn't mean there wasn't some group out in a hut somewhere that did, but basically they were gone. They were out of town. They were finished. Even today, there are these little groups in Israel that are Ebionites. They call themselves Ebionites, so that's how Paul won. He hit exactly what the people wanted. They want equality with the Jew without the commandments, and bingo, I'll give you what you want. Thank you for your thoughtful question. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה בחפצו כל